In the previous episode, tensions escalate between the two families of Mr. Ohemeng, following the shocking revelation of Mrs. Ababrese's spiritual death and Nyako's vow for revenge. As both families continue to fight in court over the inheritance and the unresolved burial arrangements of Mr. Ohemeng, a deeper and more sinister battle looms. Nyako, fueled by his mother's untimely death, seeks both legal justice and spiritual retribution, while Abayi remains confident and arrogant, pushing the limits of this family feud. The court case takes unexpected twists as the accusations fly between the two sons and dark secrets come to light. As both sides struggle to gain control of the empire left behind, the weight of greed, mistrust, and unresolved family conflicts threatens to destroy everything Mr. Ohemeng built. Will Nyako's plan for revenge succeed, or will Abayi's ruthless approach prevail? Can the family find peace before they tear themselves apart? Abayi's arrogance had reached its peak. He had made it clear to Nyako in a chilling confrontation that he and his mother were responsible for Mrs. Ababrese's death. This revelation sent shivers down Nyako's spine. He realized that if he didn't act swiftly, he could be next. The weight of the situation pressed heavily on him, and he knew he had to take action before things spiraled further out of control. One fateful evening, as Abayi was returning home after a long day, something felt off. The air was tense, and he couldn't shake the feeling that someone was watching him. He quickened his pace, glancing over his shoulder, but saw nothing. As he reached his front door and began to unlock it, masked men appeared out of the shadows. Before he could react, they grabbed him forcefully and dragged him into a waiting vehicle. It's truly heartbreaking to see siblings, bound by the same blood, tearing each other apart over material possessions. They get so consumed by greed and the desire for control that they forget the most important truth. Even their parents, the original owners of the wealth, couldn't take it with them when they passed. In the end, all the money, houses and possessions stay behind, while the family bond, the thing that should matter the most, gets shattered. It's a painful reminder that in chasing wealth, we often lose sight of what really matters: love, unity, and peace within the family. Abayi awoke groggily, his head throbbing. As his vision cleared, he realized he was inside an abandoned, uncompleted building. The cold air filled with tension, and to his horror, he saw gunmen standing ominously around him. His heart sank further when he noticed Nyako standing among them, his face filled with rage. Nyako stepped forward, eyes blazing with fury. "You admitted you killed my mother," he began, his voice trembling with emotion. "How sure are you that you won't do the same to me? We all want to survive in this mess. But you and your mother have taken everything from us, leaving us with nothing. My mother managed our father's company with loyalty, but your greed destroyed her. You even threatened to kill me. Is this how you think it should end?" Abayi, now fully aware of the gravity of the situation, could feel the cold grip of fear tightening around his chest. He knew his life hung by a thread. Desperation filled his voice as he stammered, "Nyako, I'm sorry. Please, let's settle this in court. We don't need to go down this path. It's not too late to resolve everything peacefully." But Nyako's mind was made up. He had suffered too much loss, too much betrayal. The apology fell on deaf ears. "Court won't bring my mother back," Nyako said, his voice hardening. With a swift movement, he grabbed a gun from one of the gunmen and leveled it at Abayi. Before Abayi could say another word, the shot rang out, echoing in the empty building. Abayi collapsed, lifeless, as the weight of revenge and tragedy closed in. The cold reality set in. Another life lost in a fight over what neither of them could take with them, leaving behind nothing but sorrow and more destruction. Chayewa was growing desperate with each passing day. Her son, Abayi, had vanished without a trace, and every attempt to find him had ended in frustration. She feared the worst, her heart heavy with the possibility that something terrible had happened to him. Had he been kidnapped? Or worse, had he been killed? The unanswered questions gnawed at her, consuming her thoughts day and night. When it was time for them to appear in court regarding the ongoing legal battle, Abayi was nowhere to be found. His absence sent shockwaves through the court and their family. The police immediately launched an investigation, combing through every lead, every clue. But months went by with no sign of him. His disappearance became a haunting mystery, leaving Chayewa in a state of unbearable uncertainty. Though she had no proof, Chayewa began to suspect that Nyako might be behind her son's disappearance. She remembered the bitter confrontations, the threats, and the deep-seated resentment that Nyako harbored after his mother's death. Could it be that Nyako had killed Abayi to avenge his mother? The thought tormented her, but without evidence, she was powerless. She could only grieve silently, torn between hope and despair, fearing that she had lost her son forever. In her quiet moments of mourning, she wept bitterly for Abayi, longing to see him again, dead or alive. But as the days stretched into months, the silence surrounding his disappearance only deepened her sorrow. Chayewa's determination to take control of the company her late husband left behind had only grown stronger, even in the absence of her eldest son, Abayi. Without him, her hopes in court seemed dim, as Kumiwa, her second daughter, lacked knowledge of the company's affairs and was unable to help her mother's cause. The legal battle over property had consumed the family, and in their relentless pursuit of wealth, they had completely forgotten the most basic duty to their father, his burial. His body still remained in the mortuary, neglected and unburied, as the fight for material wealth overshadowed everything else. Awuku, Chayewa's youngest child, had watched in silence as his family crumbled under the weight of greed and resentment, but he could no longer keep quiet. In his heart, he knew that the fight over their father's property was tearing their family apart. One evening, in a moment of courage, Awuku decided to confront his mother and siblings once again. He pleaded with them, his voice filled with emotion. "I believe Abayi is either dead or kidnapped because of this senseless fight over the company and father's property. If we continue like this, it will only get worse. More souls will be lost, and in the end, we'll have destroyed everything that Daddy built for us. We are one family, one blood. Fighting each other is not the answer. Please, let's stop this before it's too late." His words were filled with wisdom and sincerity, but they fell on deaf ears. His siblings, blinded by their desire for wealth, dismissed his plea. They had become so deeply entangled in the conflict that they could not see the larger picture. To them, the battle was far from over. Chayewa, in particular, was furious at her youngest son's suggestion. She couldn't understand why Awuku wasn't standing by her side in the fight. Her eyes flared with anger as she lashed out, "How dare you speak like this, Awuku? Don't you see what's at stake? I will fight until my last breath to make sure that all the properties are taken from the second wife's children. They don't deserve what your father built." Awuku was disheartened. He had tried everything to bring peace to the family, but his words had only angered his mother more. His siblings, too, were too entrenched in their bitterness to listen. He realized with great sadness that this fight was no longer about justice or fairness. It had become a battle fueled by pride, resentment, and greed. Despite his family's refusal to listen, Awuku stood firm in his beliefs. He knew that continuing this war would only lead to more suffering and loss. The company, once the symbol of their father's hard work and success, was now at the center of a conflict that threatened to tear the family apart for good. But Chaiwa, blinded by her desire for revenge and control, could not see the damage she was causing. In the end, Awuku could only watch helplessly as his family continued down a destructive path. He prayed that, one day, they would realize the truth, that no amount of wealth could ever replace the bonds of family, and that by fighting each other, they were destroying the very legacy their father had worked so hard to build. The once proud Ohemeng family, now consumed by greed and conflict, stood on the brink of collapse, and with Abayi still missing, the future of the family seemed darker than ever. During the court proceedings, after months of tension and legal battles, the judge finally delivered the long-awaited verdict. The ruling was in favor of Nyako and his siblings, recognizing their mother's significant contribution to managing the company while she was alive. The judge declared that the majority of the company's shares would remain with Nyako and his siblings. However, in an effort to maintain fairness, the judge insisted that 30% of the company's shares be granted to Chaiwa and her children. Additionally, the remaining properties, including houses and cars, were to be shared between the two families according to a fair distribution. Despite the balanced decision, Chaiwa was far from satisfied. The ruling, which was meant to bring closure, only fueled her bitterness. To her, the 30% share wasn't enough. She had envisioned complete control over the company and had vowed to secure it for her children. Now, the thought of sharing it with the children of the second wife, whom she still blamed for the downfall of her own family, was unbearable. As the ruling echoed in her mind, Chaiwa sat silently, a storm of anger and frustration brewing inside her. She refused to accept defeat. To her, this wasn't justice. In her eyes, the company still rightfully belonged to her and her children, and she couldn't let go of that belief. As she left the courtroom, she made a dark and solemn promise to herself. She would do everything in her power to destroy the company, no matter the cost. If she couldn't have it all, then neither would the children of the second wife. She knew the ruling was final, but her mind was set on revenge. She would undermine the business, plant seeds of discord, and create chaos until the company crumbled. In her eyes, the destruction of the company would be her ultimate victory, a way to take back control, even if it meant that no one would benefit from it in the end. As the families left the courtroom, unaware of Chaiwa's sinister resolve, the stage was set for a new chapter of conflict. The court's decision had brought legal closure, but the war between the two families was far from over. With Chaiwa plotting her revenge, the future of the company and the legacy of Mr. Ohemeng was now hanging by a thread. As the court's decision unfolded, Kumiwa found herself stepping into the company office to represent her missing brother, Abayi. Though she had little experience with the company's operations, she quickly aligned with her mother Chaiwa in their shared desire to seize full control of the business. Their motives, however, were far from noble. Rather than contributing to the company's survival, they conspired to pull it down, seeing its destruction as a way to satisfy their greed and thirst for revenge. The company was already on the brink of collapse, having been weakened by months of family conflict, court battles, and neglect. Nyako, now determined to restore what was left of the business, faced an uphill battle. He worked tirelessly to keep the company afloat, but Chaiwa and Kumiwa were actively sabotaging his efforts, creating further turmoil from within. Chaiwa's thirst for power didn't stop at legal manipulation and sabotage. Still driven by revenge and bitterness, she returned to the same fetish priest who had helped her kill Abayi. She was determined to eliminate Nyako once and for all, believing that without him, the company would fall entirely into her hands. The priest gave her a similar magical powder to the one she had used on Abayi, instructing her to sprinkle it on Nyako's office chair, ensuring that he would meet the same fate as his mother. With the powder in hand, Chaiwa returned home and entrusted it to her daughter, Kumiwa, to carry out the plan. She explained the task carefully, instructing Kumiwa to sprinkle the powder on Nyako's office chair when he was not around. But, as they whispered about their sinister plan, Chaiwa's youngest son, Awuku, overheard their conversation. Awuku's heart sank as the realization hit him like a wave. His mother, the person he had always looked up to, had been responsible for the death of Nyako's mother, Abayi, and now she was plotting to do the same to Nyako. The weight of this revelation was unbearable, and Awuku knew he could not sit idly by while his mother destroyed not only the company, but also the lives of Nyako and his siblings. Awuku, the voice of reason in a family torn apart by greed, had always believed in peace and unity, but now he was faced with a grim choice. He could either stay silent, allowing his mother and sister to carry out their deadly plan, or he could stand up against them, even if it meant going against his own family. His mind raced as he contemplated the gravity of the situation. His mother's actions had already caused immense damage, and now more lives were at stake. Awuku had made a decision he knew would change everything. His mother and sister were set on carrying out their dark plan, and he couldn't bear the thought of standing by and letting it happen. Determined to stop the cycle of hatred, he secretly made his way to Nyako's house. Nyako welcomed him warmly, unaware of the heavy burden weighing on Awuku's heart. As they sat down, Awuku told Nyako he had a secret to share, but only under one condition. Curious, Nyako agreed. Awuku explained that he wanted to leave the country and start a new life abroad, far from the family conflicts over his father's property. He said he wanted no part in the fighting and was ready to distance himself entirely, but he needed Nyako's help to make that happen. Nyako listened carefully and then asked, "How much do you need?" Awuku nervously mentioned a sum, unsure how Nyako would respond. To his utter shock, Nyako disappeared into his room and returned with twice the amount Awuku had requested. The younger man couldn't believe it. Nyako handed him the money with a calm expression, as though it were a small matter. "Go home and prepare for your journey abroad," Nyako said firmly, avoiding any further discussion. He seemed uninterested in whatever secret Awuku had initially planned to reveal, choosing instead to focus on helping Awuku move forward. Awuku left the house with the money, but his heart grew heavier with each step. He couldn't shake the unease gnawing at him. The truth about his mother and sister's plot to kill Nyako still weighed heavily on him, and he knew he couldn't just walk away without doing the right thing. His conscience refused to let him remain silent. Unable to bear the guilt, Awuku turned back and returned to Nyako's house. This time, when Nyako saw him, he was puzzled. "Why are you back?" Nyako asked. With a deep breath, Awuku confessed everything. The evil plan his mother and sister had concocted, the magical powder, and their intentions to kill Nyako just as they had done to his mother. Nyako stood in stunned silence, his mind racing as the full weight of the betrayal settled in. He had never imagined that Chaiwa and Kumiwa would go to such lengths to destroy him. Awuku, now deeply remorseful, apologized on behalf of his family. "Please forgive them," he begged, his voice filled with sincerity. "I don't want any more bloodshed. My mother and sister are blinded by anger and greed, but I don't want to be a part of it, and I don't want anyone else to suffer because of this feud." Awuku continued, his voice trembling. "Please, Nyarko, forgive them. Let's end this before more lives are lost." Nyarko stood there, absorbing Awuku's heartfelt plea. His mind was flooded with emotions, anger, betrayal, and sadness. He had lost his mother to Chaiwa's evil schemes, and now they had come for him. But looking at Awuku, Nyarko could see the sincerity in his eyes, the deep regret that had driven him to confess his family's plot. After a long silence, Nyarko finally spoke. "I never thought it would come to this," Nyarko said quietly, his voice filled with pain. "I won't deny that I'm angry, but I see you're different, Awuku. You have the courage to stand up for what's right, even when your own family is against you. For that, I respect you." He paused, then added, "I will forgive them, but not for their sake, for yours. Because you chose peace when they chose destruction. I'll make sure no harm comes to your mother and sister, but this fighting has to stop." Relieved but still anxious, Awuku thanked Nyarko deeply and promised to leave for abroad soon. However, unbeknownst to them both, Kumiwa had already visited the office that morning. She had followed through with her mother's plan and sprinkled the deadly powder on Nyarko's office chair. The wheels of the dark plot were already in motion. Nyarko returned to his office that same day, his mind still heavy with the revelations from Awuku. As he entered the building, he stopped at the security post and asked casually, "Did Kumiwa come in today?" The security officer, not sensing anything unusual, replied, "Yes, sir. She came in earlier. She was only here for a few minutes and then left." A chill ran down Nyarko's spine. He knew exactly why she had been there. With Awuku's warning still fresh in his mind, he understood the danger awaiting him in his office. The realization hit him hard, but he knew that he needed to act fast. Nyarko, knowing the deadly intent behind the magical powder, quickly devised a plan. After confirming that Kumiwa had visited the office earlier that day, he called the security officer who had been on duty. "Switch my chair with Kumiwa's," he ordered calmly, aware of the deadly consequences if the powder remained where it was. The security officer did as instructed, making sure no one noticed the switch. Later that afternoon, Kumiwa arrived at the office, her demeanor seemingly cheerful despite the underlying conflict. Her first stop was Nyarko's office, where she entered with a smile, greeting him for the first time in a long while, as if there were no tension between them. She was pleasantly surprised to see Nyarko seated comfortably in what she thought was the cursed chair. Satisfied that the plan had worked, she quickly excused herself and went to her own office. Unbeknownst to her, the chairs had been switched. When she sat in her office chair, the very chair she had prepared for Nyarko, the same deadly powder she had intended to kill him with, began working its dark magic. Hours later, Kumiwa started feeling unwell, her body weak, her energy drained. By the time she returned home, she looked pale and sickly, her condition rapidly deteriorating. Her family was at a loss. The symptoms she exhibited were eerily similar to those that had plagued Abayi in her final days. Within just 2 weeks, Kumiwa had changed completely. She was withering away, and it became clear that her fate was sealed. Chaiwa, sensing that something was deeply wrong, began to panic. Nyarko was healthy and strong, unaffected by the curse that was supposed to destroy him. Desperation drove her back to the same fetish priest who had helped her before. The priest, however, delivered devastating news. "Kumiwa will die," he said with finality. "Someone switched the chair, and the curse fell upon her instead. There is no reversing it now. His words were cold and unrelenting. The magic had taken its course, and there was no turning back. At that moment, Cherwa was struck by a devastating realization. She had already lost her son Abayi, and now her daughter Kumiwa was slipping away too, all because of her own greed and bitterness. Proverbs 26:27 rang true. Whoever digs a pit will fall into it. If someone rolls a stone, it will roll back on them. Chaiwa had set a deadly trap for Nyako, but that same trap had ensnared her own daughter. The stone of destruction she had pushed toward Nyako had rolled back upon her family, leaving devastation in its wake. Her regret was overwhelming, but it was too late. She had spent her days plotting to destroy the children of the second wife, and now she was faced with the unimaginable pain of losing her own. The sight of Kumiwa withering away, just as Abayi had, was a punishment far greater than anything Chaiwa could have imagined. The reality of a mother burying her children, when it should have been her children who buried her, was a sorrow too deep to describe. Greed and hatred had consumed her, blinding her to the truth that the pursuit of revenge would destroy not only others, but also herself. Now, as she watched Kumiwa slowly fade away, the weight of her actions crushed her spirit. There was no turning back, no undoing what had been done. All that remained was the bitter taste of regret and the haunting knowledge that her family had been torn apart by her own hands. Letter from Awuku. Dear Mother, Kumiwa, and Jamfi, by the time you read this letter, I will already be gone, heading abroad to start a new life, far from the conflicts that have torn our family apart. I can no longer bear the weight of watching our family destroy itself. We're supposed to be one blood, but greed and bitterness have turned us into enemies. I tried to bring peace between us, but it seems no one was willing to listen. I can no longer watch as our father's legacy is stained by hatred and evil plots. It is with a heavy heart that I must confess. I revealed everything to Nyako. I told him about the plan to harm him with the magical powder, just as you did to Abayi. It was wrong, and I could not allow another innocent life to be lost. I know this might bring you anger, but I hope that in time you will understand why I did what I did. I have chosen to leave not because I don't love you, but because I can no longer stand by and watch the family disintegrate. I want peace, and I know that continuing to fight over what's left of our father's company will only lead to more destruction. I won't be coming back, and I hope that one day you'll find it in your hearts to forgive me. Take care of yourselves, and may we all find the peace we so desperately need. Awuku. After reading the letter, Chayewa was stunned. The betrayal of her youngest son, combined with the deep grief of watching Kumiwa's health decline, became too much for her. She cried bitterly, her heart broken not only by the loss of her son's trust, but by the realization that her evil deeds were catching up with her. Just a few weeks later, Kumiwa succumbed to her illness, leaving Jamfi as the last child of Chayewa. With the deaths of Abayi and Kumiwa, Chayewa felt utterly defeated. She had spent all her money trying to save her daughter, and could no longer afford to follow through with the other court cases. She was left with no choice but to give up the fight, and finally agree to bury her late husband, Mr. Ohemeng. 2 months later, as the family prepared for the burial, Chayewa's grief and guilt weighed heavily on her body. She could no longer bear the pain, and her health deteriorated rapidly. Eventually she passed away, leaving Jamfi as the only surviving child. On the day of the burial, Mr. Ohemeng, Chayewa, and Kumiwa were all laid to rest together, an ending that could have been avoided had greed and revenge not consumed their lives. Despite Nyako's victory in court, the company could not be saved. It was burdened by debt and mismanagement, and soon it faced bankruptcy. Unable to handle the overwhelming financial losses, Nyako sold their share of the company, marking the end of the Ohemeng legacy. What had once been a successful business, built through hard work, was destroyed by the greed and bitterness that had taken over the family. Proverbs 28:20-22 reminds us, "A faithful person will be richly blessed, but one eager to get rich will not go unpunished. To show partiality is not good, yet a person will do wrong for a piece of bread. The stingy are eager to get rich and are unaware that poverty awaits them." This verse speaks directly to the tragic story of the Ohemeng family. Their eagerness for wealth and control blinded them to the value of faithfulness, unity, and love. In their pursuit of riches, they lost everything: their family, their company, and their legacy. Dear viewers, let us learn from this story. Share where you're watching this from, and if you've enjoyed the story, don't forget to subscribe to Ananse Web of Tales for more powerful and inspiring stories. In conclusion, we are reminded of the power of love and unity in John 13:34-35. "A new command I give you, love one another. As I have loved you, so you must love one another. By this, everyone will know that you are my disciples, if you love one another." Let us pray that love, not greed, guides our actions. May the Lord bless and protect you from all evil schemes. May the enemy's traps fall upon them, and may you and your loved ones walk in peace, unity, and faith. Amen.